Hello plant people, how are you guys doing today? If you're new around here, my name is Ashley and I'm a soil scientist. On this channel, I like to take that science and apply it to all things plants. And in today's video, Kevin from Epic Gardening has gone no-till. Let's talk about it. So first off, this is with Kevin's blessing. I did talk to him before I'm doing this video, but I do want to go through some things he talks about in it and why I am so glad he made this video. If you've been on this channel long enough, you know I'm a huge advocate for tilling in a garden in the initial stages, for sure, at a minimum. And there's several different reasons why, and we're gonna get into why that is. And then I'm even gonna give a little bit of commentary on how Kevin could have even zhuzhed this up a little bit more, made it a bit of a more bougie experience, and all that fun stuff. So a little bit of a background here. If you don't know who Kevin from Epic Gardening is, you probably haven't been on the YouTube garden circuit that long. But Kevin is a gardener, I believe in California. I'm not 100% sure. I'm pretty sure he's in California though. And he typically is a container small garden person. But he has moved to an acreage, or I guess acreage by terms of California. He has a little bit extra land now. So he has more in-ground gardens. And so he typically is a no-till, no-dig type guy. He loves Charles Downing, sorry, I'm gonna get attacked for that. I can't pronounce his last name, I can't remember what it is. But anyways, he's a huge proponent for them, loves the guy's methods, but he's encountering issues. So he's decided to change things just a little bit. And I wanna go into the soil science of why what Kevin's doing is a good, very good choice, and why more people who wanna go no-till or raised bed gardening should do what Kevin's doing. So, and we're gonna apply a little bit of science to it. I'm going to screen record. I'm hoping volume-wise this turns out okay. We'll see. Hopefully it isn't too much of a train wreck. Let's watch this 9-minute video. I'm gonna cut out segments of it because I'm pretty sure YouTube is going to get very angry at me for this.
I've grown in the soil, and I've never tilled my soil at all in those about 2 years that I've been an in-ground gardener until last fall. So you're probably thinking, why would Kevin, the man who has gone to the UK, toured Charles Downing's market farm, who has done a collaboration video with Charles Downing, and even has a picture of myself and Charles framed in my office, why would I do the unthinkable and actually till my garden or dig my garden out? And that's exactly what we're going to get into in this video. So let's talk about tilling your garden, why you actually may want to do it at least once. But first, what is tilling? It's really just the act of breaking up the soil surface, sometimes 6, 12, maybe even 18 or 24 inches deep, depending on the methodology that you use. You could use a rototiller, or you could just come in with the old school double dig method, which actually Jacques, our resident gardener.
So he's saying like what is tilling, and he's indicating that it's the use of an rototiller or a double dig method. It's essentially roughing up the surface of the soil. And that's exactly what tilling is. Now, there is low till methods that are still considered tillage, but are not as invasive. And there's a lot of science to show that even a low till structure, either on a farming side or in a garden, isn't harmful or it isn't detrimental. And all it is it's just disturbing the top layer of topsoil enough to either transplant a plant in or place a seed in and then put the soil back over top. So I think in a lot of cases, no-till gardens are actually low-till gardens. And where I'm from in Saskatchewan, a number of farmers I work with, our farm that we have as a family, all use low-till methods, which is typically just a scraper of some sort that scrapes a little bit of a line in the ground, plops a seed in, and then rollers come in behind and pack it up. So low-till and tillage, two different things, but tillage is legitimately turning over dirt. We're physically turning over at least 5 to 12 inches of the topsoil.
Thing, which he says, number one, was a lot of work, and number two, he would never do again. But why would you do this? Why would you break the soil up to plant into a garden? Well, if you have crazy compact soil, it's going to help break soil compaction. It's also going to kill some weeds, or the ability to actually root up some gnarly weeds and then filter them out from that garden planting area. And typically what happens is
some of the benefits of it are redistributing or uncompacting the soil, and he's also indicating that it's going to help with weed suppression. So let's digest those two separate topics a little bit here. When it comes to compaction, soil compaction, in Kevin's specific case, he has clay soil. He has a really heavy clay soil. He indicated that in this video. And so what happens is we end up with compaction, and compaction naturally occurs on our soils. It's very common here in Canada where we have snow that obviously adds pressure to the soil surface. We have vehicles driving over it, and in the city scenarios, we have the actual building of our property. There's a lot of equipment moving on the property prior to the house being built, and that all compacts the soil over time. Foot traffic, all that stuff. And then just general practices in general. And then just general practices overall that can result in compaction. So compaction can take place regardless of human or non-human interventions. It depends on the soil type and what's being grown on that soil. Now, tilling is going to temporarily relieve compaction of the soil, allowing the roots to penetrate deeper. There are a few trains of thought saying that, well, what you would do is you would just plant deep tillage radishes in the area, and that would till the soil, and you wouldn't have to rototill. But the way I look at this, and especially in Kevin's case with a heavy clay soil, he's probably having something called a perched water table, where he has a clay soil where water is unable to penetrate. And so what happens is the water, as he's watering his in-ground gardens that are in a no-dig system, he waters, it trickles down, it would hit that clay layer. It's either going to roll out of the system, or it's going to sit there and leave those roots in an area that can be anaerobic. And so to avoid that, we can rototill that clay soil and then put our no dig or low till garden on top of it. I wouldn't in Kevin's case. I'm not sure the specifics of what he did in this case, but if you rototill an in-ground bed, I wouldn't then put cardboard on top. I would simply just put the compost on top of the already tilled soil, because that's going to help to break up that natural horizon we see, and it's going to help us avoid the potential of a perched water table or a separate profile within the system that's interacting differently, both the roots, water, and nutrients. So to avoid that, rototill it in, and then just top dress with the compost and put it directly on top of that rototilled soil. So the next thing he makes mention of is weeds. So there's a few different trains of thoughts here. In organic farming systems or large production systems, there are very specific types of weeds where tillage is going to eliminate them. Tillage is the only solution in some cases to manage these weeds. So in organic production, it isn't uncommon for the farmer to till, because that is their only means that they have to actually control a weed. So he is right there. The only issue is that, and he does make mention to this in this video, is that if you till and you are tilling quackgrass or anything that's a rhizome spread type plant, you're going to make more of them because you're slicing and dicing the rhizome up. Every time you do that, you're going to end up with two plants on either end of the rhizome root. And then there is a little bit of a seed bank in the soil. And we don't talk about this often in gardening, but in soil science, especially when we're talking like archaeological soil science, there are seed banks. And so we can see seeds throughout the entire soil profile. And despite them being dug in there for years or generations, sometimes they are still viable. So you may have just brought up seeds that were dormant to the surface, and now they have the light, and if they're photosensitive, they have the oxygen, everything they need, they're in the perfect chemistry to actually germinate. So in some cases it can make your weed situation a little bit worse, but you have to weigh the positives against the negatives.
In plant matter or organic matter at the moment of tilling, and then that first planting in after tends to have a bit more of a nutrient release. And so
you're saying that if you till in compost or manures, any sort of organic material into the actual tillage process, it's going to add nutrients, and it will, to a point. The only thing when you do this is I would suggest, if possible, actually testing your soil pH first. And the reason for this is because it's going to help you determine what exactly you need to do. So I have in my book, you can grab these on Etsy or on Amazon, the paperback version. And I have a test to teach you how to test for soil pH. And I go through all the different steps you need to take to do this at home. No fancy equipment needed. Allows you to record it, everything. I suggest doing a pH test first before doing this, because if your pH is too low or too high, you can then add things like gypsum or lime or sulfur, all of which are going to help in multiple different ways, especially in a clay soil. So if you were to say mix in lime as an example, and you mix that in with your compost, you're going to be able to buffer your pH, and therefore you're going to have a better nutrient release, because we know the nutrients is only available at certain pHs, and so that's going to help. Also, lime is really good at causing flocculation, so it actually causes clay molecules in particular to repel each other, kind of like magnets would. And so obviously, again, hugely helpful in a compacted soil. So when you do this, there is really no limit to how much you should put on. I'm going to say a minimum of 5 to 6 inches, and then the lime and the gypsum and all that stuff is going to be dependent on the volume of land you're dealing with. And I will leave a link to, I have an article that I wrote on this, as well as I have several videos on this concept to kind of help you out with that. And if you are growing lots of brassicaceae species, so I see he has what looks to be cabbage and Brussels sprouts in the background, that bed would have done really, really well with a ton of manure and not compost, because those are very sulfur happy plants. He also has like onions and leeks, it looks, in the background. So again, all plants that do very, very well in the presence of sulfur.
Have a nice strong crop that first time after tilling. Now, when you talk about like agricultural monocropping, then that's really the only system they're running. They're tilling, they're reincorporating mostly synthetic or chemical fertilizers, and then they're just doing that over and over again. I'm not saying that's what we need to go towards, but we do need to understand what tilling is.
Okay, so that's one thing where I shouldn't say this. I don't know what the US does. I don't know what your classic agricultural practices are. The farthest south I've ever gone dealing with farmers is North Dakota. I've dealt with some farmers in Texas, but other than that, as far as what I've spoken to them, it's really similar to what we're doing in Canada. And so there's this concept that farmers go and they rototill land, and then they put fertilizer in, and then they put seeds in. And that's really not the case. At most what they're doing is they have something called an air drill, and I'll try to maybe insert some footage if I can find something. But what it's doing is it has literally a little fork on the end similar to this, and there'll be like depending on the size of the drill, it'll be like 46 runs or 80 different runs, and they'll be equally spaced apart. And all they do is they drag the knife, it's literally called a knife, across the soil surface. And out of that same knife, there is fertilizer that comes out, there's seed that comes out, and it just literally goes through, makes a tiny little slit in the soil, drops it in, and then there's literally a roller behind it that's super duper heavy, and it literally rolls all the soil back into place. So that is a low till system. That's really not that invasive, and it's arguably less invasive than what we gardeners are doing when we're transplanting. So when we transplant, we're literally digging and a whole section of soil. Farmers don't even do that. So common misconception, but as someone who works in agriculture, I do defend farmers because they put up with a lot of shit.
And then we can talk about the downsides. So the first downside is almost the reverse of the benefit, which seems very counterintuitive, but actually tilling can increase soil compaction at the layer below the depth that you till to. So if you're coming in with a rotor...
So he's saying here, tilling can increase soil compaction at the layer below the depth you till to. So we know this concept in agriculture. It's called a hard pan. And it's more common in a system where, again, we're running the knives over top and we're not touching the ground underneath, but we're running really heavy equipment across it. And so whenever we have heavy equipment movement, we end up with compaction. Now, and this is still something that's heavily debated in the community of science, soil science, I don't know if that compaction is from the tillage, low till. I think if there's heavy till, okay, fine. But if we're talking low till scenarios, I'm not, or a one-time till scenario like what he's talking about here, I'm not confident that that is the cause of the hard pan. I would argue the cause of the hard pan is actually traffic over top of the soil, and that can be in the form of foot traffic or mechanical traffic. And the reason why I say this is because when we study things like forest soils, for example, and the logging industry, anyone who works in the logging industry, let me know in the comments down below because you would already know this. You only log once the ground is frozen. And the reason for that is because the soil is filled with water. And when it fills with water like that, what ends up happening is there's nowhere for it to compact, because what typically would have air spaces in it is locked out by ice crystals. So we don't end up with as much compaction. And that is a system that we do not till ever. We never till a forest soil ever. It's impossible. It's full of tree roots, right? But we still see compaction in those ecosystems despite the fact that there's no tillage, which makes me think that in the farming industry, in the gardening industry, in the forestry industry, which we already know, and we've, as scientists, we know this to the point that the forestry industry only logs typically when the ground is frozen, for the most part. There are some exceptions there, but it does cause compaction. And so it makes me think it's probably foot traffic or high foot traffic. So with that being said, I don't think for Kevin it's going to be a one-time treatment if he truly does have a really heavy clay soil. I'm assuming a few years down the road he's going to have to redo this. Now, the only way he would never, ever, ever have to redo this is if he never spiced up the garden and he always left the lanes in the lanes that they're supposed to be in, and he never walked or stepped on the fluffy areas. So that would be the only way in which we wouldn't see this happen. But needless to say, regardless of what you're doing, that hard pan will exist in a freshly tilled soil. The key here is we want to till to a depth in which the plant roots aren't going to end up on another perched water table and potentially end up in a saturation zone. So in order to avoid this, we need to till to a depth of adequate levels. If possible, I would go 12 inches or more because plant roots go pretty deep, but yeah, ideally speaking.
Final and arguably the largest downside to tilling your garden is the effect that it has not on your plants, but on the soil underneath them. So what you're doing is you are working up that soil, right? So what about everything that lives in that soil? You have your mycorrhizal fungal networks that partner with the plant roots. You have bacteria, you have earthworms, you have invertebrates. All these things partner up together, and the soil really acts as this cohesive multi-species organism, so to speak, to help your plants grow. So when you're tilling, you are shredding that all up. So bacteria that are adapted to maybe a certain depth are getting moved to a different depth. Earthworms are getting ripped apart. The mycelial networks are getting shredded, and they have to rebuild themselves. And on top of that, because you have caused so much destruction and disturbance, you're going to have a lot of organisms that die off. And then that dying off, the carbon, the nitrogen that's within their bodies starts to decompose and be oxidized and become available. So you get this sort of rush of nutrients in the soil, mostly from the things that you have destroyed, which seems nice, but it's kind of like slamming a bunch of coffee. Trust me, I've been slamming probably too many cups of coffee, and it does not.
I like that. That's funny. So he's not wrong there. When you do rototill, you do disturb your mycelium in the soil, which can take literally years to actually make even happen at all. Decades. At times. There's one, I talked about it before, in the US, and it is the oldest one in the world. They estimate it at about between 2,000 and 7,000 years old or something crazy like that. Anyways, they take thousands of years to put together. So that's, definitely a downfall. Now, if his soil was like a super heavy clay, I doubt he had mycelium in there anyways. Because you do need like a certain level of oxygen. And the other thing is too, is if your soil is in need of a tilling, it has likely anaerobic bacteria, which you don't necessarily want. You want aerobic bacteria because that is what is the healthy stuff. Now there's obviously beneficial anaerobic bacteria out there, but aerobic is the best bacteria you could possibly aim for. And so if you have a heavy enough soil, it's unlikely you have a very deep microbial profile to begin with. It's probably located in those top little inches anyways. So when you do rototill, it ends up with a massive influx of oxygen, which actually can cause a massive spike in microbe activity. There's lots of studies looking at this. So that rapid increase in division of microbes is huge. But if you don't till in organic material, if you're not keeping your moistures nice and high, you will end up with a mass die-off as well because there's nothing to feed them. So if you're having a massive oxygen influx, you want to make sure you're supplying the microbes with the meals that they need. So you want to obviously incorporate organic material. I'm not too, like in Kevin's case specifically with the clay, I'm not too worried about microbe die-off. That's like, it's probably, you're going to have some, but quite honestly, you're gonna have a massive influx because you just introduced a ton of oxygen. You just made their home go from 2 inches to like 6 or 12 inches. So you're gonna have a massive explosion. And as long as the food is there, the microbes are going to keep up as well. Obviously, more of the macro fauna, so insects and things like earthworms and such, those will be damaged clearly, but protozoa, algae, all that sort of stuff is actually going to have a massive explosion. So the reason why you see really, really good growth after you till is because you just put a ton of oxygen into the system. Now, one thing to note is that you also introduce light. And so a lot of microbes do have light sensitivity. And so when we do that, we do run the risk of microbe death due to the onslaught of UV light, which is very clarifying. And so it can kill off a lot of those microbes. So just something to keep in mind there. I think it's common misconception. You're killing your microbes. You're really not. The reason why you see that massive influx in growth and just happier plants is literally because you just introduced a ton of oxygen. So they're breathing a little easier down under now.
Last as long as you might think. It's not a long-lasting energy source. So tilling the garden and seeing that sort of death release of nutrition might seem good at the start, but really after that sort of fades away, it's not going to be great for the garden. Well,
So yeah, he's just saying he's working on the premise that the microbes are dying, and the fact is that you have a massive influx in population. You have the food there, but then you don't continue to see that coffee growth, that coffee high growth. And the reason why you're not seeing the coffee high growth actually comes down to the fact that there's not, the oxygen eventually depletes, like it recompacts itself. So you don't have an environment to support that many microbes. In reality, it's kind of similar to what he's saying, but it's kind of different a little bit. I don't know. I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. I hope I explained that properly.
Spent the last few minutes absolutely trash talking tilling, so why would I have then tilled my garden? Especially when we did this redesign here in the backyard. There used to be just a few beds here. Now we have 8 of these 5x5 beds, and we have these huge long beds full of alliums right now, garlic, onions, leeks. And honestly, everything's looking pretty stellar after I tilled. Well, Jacques and I both, we study a lot from market gardeners, market farmers, commercial farmers, people who have to make a living gardening and farming and actually producing at scale. And when you're talking about even no-till growers, a lot of no-till growers have moved to a one-till.
Yeah. So he's saying he's studying market gardeners, and he's looking at people who actually have to make a living off food production and what they do. So I find this so funny because I did a video on the no dig garden concept, and I didn't slam it, but there's holes in the theory, especially when we're looking for really good healthy growth. There's definitely holes in that theory. And so if you're looking to produce anything of substance, tillage is definitely something you gotta do at least once, if not on a quadruple year basis. Depending on your scenario, you're going to know when it's right for you to do it. Now, I have my garden out at the farm that's in kind of heavy soil, not horribly heavy soil, but semi-heavy, and I've tilled that 2 years in a row now because it is so compact. It's difficult to deal with, and if I was just to plant into that, not only would I have really poor root development, I'd have really low production. And so it is something you need. It is a tool that you should use in your arsenal. You are not a bad person if you choose to till. It is a tactic that we use for food production on a massive scale. You as a gardener are also allowed to utilize those tools.
Method. And the reason is pretty simple. We've talked about how you can shred up that soil life. Well, here at the Epic Homestead, what we did is we tested our soil, and organic matter content was somewhere around 2%, and it's a very heavy compacted clay. So the sweet spot for organic matter is somewhere around that 5-ish% range, maybe you could say maybe up to 10, but somewhere in that 5% range. So we were well under that amount. We needed a little bit more organic matter. We did a soil test. We knew we were low in a couple essential micro and macronutrients here. So we wanted to work some of that into the soil, and we wanted to break up the soil. So if you have organic matter contents that are that low.
Oh my God, Kevin. I guess when I watched this the first time, I didn't realize how hard that is. That's crazy. I feel bad for you. Introduce stuff to flocculate. Get some flocculation happening. You will not regret it, Kevin. Flocculation. Make it happen. If you ever need help, just DM me. You know where to find me. But yeah, that's crazy heavy. Wow, unbelievable. And yes, organic material, 5%, Kevin. 5% is the accepted value for healthy soil.
Think about it. When you're tilling through that soil, what are you actually killing? There's not a whole lot of soil life to begin with. We did a couple soil samples where we dug down.
That goes back to the one where I was like, probably only the 2 top inches are actually anything living in it.
And I'm talking, it's a light tannish clay, no earthworms, not a lot of weeds, almost nothing in there at all. And so when you think about destroying a soil food web, well, you need to build a soil food web.
You know what Kevin has? He has the backfill for that property. He doesn't have actual topsoil or like the natural native soil that would have been there. That is backfill soil because that pit that was dug, that is all past tilled soil. That's why it has no structure. That is why it is so heavy. That is all backfill. That's not an actual soil profile. That's all fake, but real soil, but you know what I mean. It's brought in for construction.
Destroy it, and we didn't really have much of one here at the homestead. So a first initial till, I think, is probably the optimal solution for most of us who are trying to grow in ground, unless you magically have really fantastic soil from the start. Maybe it was growing something else in the past.
You probably never will. If you are in California or an urban area, you will have backfill soil. That is just a fact, because that's how properties are made.
And you can just do a quick little compost addition, plant it out, rake it out, and you form your beds up and you're good to go. But a lot of us here in suburban homes, I mean, you're looking at fill dirt here that they built the back of your lot with from some sort of backhoe that they just like leveled the whole backyard, and you're not dealing with much to speak of. And so you do need to supercharge it. And then
so what they do here in Saskatchewan, like in where I'm from, is they'll build on swamps, like old swamp areas, because Saskatchewan's glacial till. So it's the pothole soil, so it's where glaciers kind of dumped and dragged and dumped, so it's very like ebbs and flows. It seems flat, but it's really not. It's called pothole landscape, glacial till, look it up. But what happens, we end up with swamps and beds of water. And so what we do here in Saskatchewan is we find really, really heavy clay sources from wherever it has to come from, and then we move it into the area when we're building up to build properties on it, and we backfill these ponds, and we just fill them with clay, and we fill the whole landscape with clay, because then our houses won't flood, or they can build houses without having them shift too much on us and wash away, because you can't use sand. You have to use soil science. Soil scientists, by the way, you can go into construction too. But yeah, so that's what they're doing. They're filling it with clay. So that's why it's so common for us homeowners, like people who live in the city, to have clay issues. You very rarely hear of us having sand issues, because every property's been backfilled with clay, because that's what is best to build houses on top of. So that's kind of funny. Homesteaders and people out of town, more often than not, have a sandy soil. And I realized that since doing YouTube and helping people in my area with soil, just pro bono for fun, I'll go out and do a quick soil test for them in and around Saskatoon and area. And every time I'm in the city, it's clay. Every time I drive outside the city, it's sand. So it's really funny, because that's exactly what's going on there.
Other thing I want to say here is you only have so many seasons of a garden in your life. Let's say you started gardening when you're 30 years old. I started when I was about...
So he's going into defending his tillage. I don't defend it, Kevin. I'm a soil scientist, and I agree with you what you've done. He's going into defending. Do not defend this. This is a very good thing. I'm so glad you did this video, Kevin, because you know what? People needed to hear this. I have been saying this for, since I started a YouTube channel, and I constantly get pushback and hate, basically telling me like, who are you? You're not Charles Downing. You don't have a cult following. What do you know? But the science is there. There's enough evidence to suggest that this is a tool that needs to be utilized and should be respected as a tool, and not just like simply canceled out of our arsenal. So yeah, that's all I have for you guys. That was a fun video. I really enjoyed this. I want to thank Kevin so much for letting me do commentary on this. I want to tip my hat to him for doing this video, because this is super fringe. Don't just do this stuff, that's for sure. It's a big no-no nowadays. But yeah, great video. Like I said, guys, you want to till if you are starting a raised bed, no dig, anything where you're introducing a new type of soil on top of an existing soil. You want to rototill and incorporate. That can be in the sense of you put a layer of like 12 inches and then rototill that in, or if you rototill and then put it over top, whatever it takes. You just have to fracture the horizon, the soil horizon, and then add something in over top of that, if possible. Test your pH first, ideally. And if you want to test like your actual microbial activity, to test your compaction, that sort of thing. Like I said, I have a ton of workbooks with that. So I have, this is just like the garden planner one. You can do a soil compaction test. I walk you through that. And then there's also a percolation test you can do. This one here. And if you pass these tests, the percolation test, and then also the microbe test, if you pass those 3 tests with your soil, it's very likely you don't have to till. And you can use this as your reference guide to determine every year whether or not it's your year to actually till your soil, because you can maybe pass these tests for the next 5 years, and then you know you don't have to till, and then year 6 you may start failing some of these, especially the percolation and the compaction tests. Those would be the first ones you start to fail, and then it's time to realize, like, oh, you know what, it may be time to till it soil. So use the methods at your disposal, such as the ones I've listed here, to determine when to do it. I have a funny feeling if I actually got my hands on Kevin's soil in his backyard, what would definitely happen is we would be able to just, you know, put a pond in place, and it would just hang out. We wouldn't even have to put like any sort of pond liner in there, judging from some of that footage. That is heavy. I feel bad for you, but it seems like you're doing some great stuff. You're managing it well. My only tip and trick to you, Kevin, is invest in some stuff to get some flocculation happening. But that's just the nerdy side of me coming out there. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye.